Hello everyone, I'm Duke and welcome to my channel. Ever since the massive success of Warband, people have been anticipating the release of the sequel, Bannerlord, and that finally came true, sort of, nearly 3 years ago, when the game was released in early access. However, since October 25 of last year, the official release has been out, and I thought it would be interesting to bring Bannerlord into perspective by comparing it to its iconic predecessor, to observe how the gameplay evolved, how it improved upon Warband in some areas, and possibly screwed up in others. If you like the content, make sure to subscribe, also link to the Discord server and Twitch, and even my Quora if that's your thing. Now let's go! So let's start with all of the ways in which Bannerlord is definitely an improvement upon Warband. Obviously, in terms of graphics and sounds, there's no contest. Bannerlord is a gorgeous game, whereas Warband is really aging in comparison. The atmosphere is well designed, the colors are simply gorgeous, the towns are actually full of people, there's no complaints. One could argue Warband's whole selling point was the amazing battle system. It's one thing to play an RPG, but an RPG in which you have your own army and fight alongside your soldiers, there simply was nothing like it at the time. In this context, Bannerlord is as satisfying as it can get, as it improved all aspects of battles. The biggest point is what I'll call the Total War mechanic, as you get to deploy troops on the battlefield by simply clicking at a zone on the map, much like Total War. In Warband, the only way to get troops to hold a key position was by going to the said position yourself, then ordering to hold. Not having to do that in Bannerlord allows for so much more reuse of tactics. Troops also have a much wider range of battle formations, which is pretty neat. And unlike Warband, whose battle maps are generated randomly, Bannerlord selects the battlefield from a few presets. While this may make some areas feel repetitive, at least the battlefields themselves are optimized. Warband players quickly learn to avoid battles nearby any hills on the map, as it would give us this, which is super annoying. And finally, the battles in Bannerlord are designed so that waves of reinforcements will keep coming, essentially until you run out of troops, unlike Warband, which limited each engagement to about 150 troops before having to fight into another round. This made large-scale battles very grindy, so props to Bannerlord for addressing and improving everything from Warband. Sieges are also an area which was well improved. In Warband, the sieges are pretty simple. You would typically charge at the walls with either a single ladder or a siege tower, and you would fight the enemy on the wall until you killed all of them, which often meant most of the fight was spent fighting over a single choke point. In Bannerlord, each settlement has 3 entry points, 2 walls and the main gate, so attacking castles will now require you to build a battering ram and siege towers. The enemy will defend using either mangonels and ballista, but you can also build those to support your own assault. Bannerlord sieges are therefore much better visually, but also in gameplay because battles on the walls can be really chaotic and cinematic. Siege defenses are also very fun as you get to man your siege equipment to devastating effect. But also throw rocks down at enemies. And of course, infinite supplies of arrows. Overall, much better sieges, though I will still make some criticisms later on. When it comes to the player's character, I also like the character creation more, as unlike Warband, you clearly see what benefits you gain from any choices made, though largely the principle is the same. And the leveling system, while a bit confusing at first, is definitely better than Warband's. Not that there was anything wrong with Warband, basically every time you leveled up you could just choose a skill to increase and that's it. In Bannerlord, however, not only are there more skills to learn, but these skills come with tons of bonuses that can make your character very overpowered. The only obstacle is that unlike Warband that lets you level up anything, Bannerlord requires you to practice the skills you want to increase. So you want to become a better horse rider? Ride a horse basically. What's cool about it is you don't have to build your character around a specific set of skills. If you end up wanting to try out new skills, you just have to start using them to improve them over time. Kingdom management is also improved a lot compared to Warband. You now get to construct a lot more projects in the towns you own, you can set companions to govern settlements for extra bonuses, and you can create caravans for trade. Kingdoms can also implement policies that will add different advantages, such as serfdom or different types of taxes. There's also a new form of currency called influence, which is used to make kingdom decisions. Different nobles within your kingdom will either approve or disapprove of your choices, and the less they approve, the more influence you need to override your lords. Influence is gained through battles and conquests, and is vital for staying in control of your faction. While Warband had the martial feature, which meant you appointed a lord to organize military campaigns, Bannerlord expanded upon this by simply allowing lords to create their own armies, in which different lords of the realm will join if they want. So kingdoms can have several armies in the field, each with their own objectives, which definitely intensifies the wars in Bannerlord. In terms of Warband mechanics, this is largely the same in Bannerlord. You recruit troops from villages, and they will upgrade as they gain experience. Party size is determined by your renown, but there's a huge addition, that of the clan mechanic. In Warband, each lord is essentially its own clan and provide only one warband, but in Bannerlord, each member of a clan can be the leader of a warband, up to a maximum number determined by renown. So if you felt limited by your own party size limit, you could ask a companion to create his own warband and follow you around, effectively increasing your army size, which is awesome. Trade is virtually the same, as markets are divided by goods, weapons, armors, and horses. The big difference with Bannerlord is that the size of your inventory depends on how many men and horses you'd have in your party. In Warband, you could just max out the inventory management skill, and you'd have a large inventory regardless of how many soldiers you have. In Bannerlord, however, any unused horse and soldiers increase the party's capacity. This severely restricts the player when alone, but it also means that when you have a large army, you can carry way more stuff than you ever could in Warband, and it becomes easy to just grab all of the loot in every battle, which when you sell adds up to a lot of money. So these are the main ways in which I feel Bannerlord improved significantly over Warband, but there are a few things that Bannerlord was either lazy about or screwed up, such as tournaments. In Warband, tournaments definitely felt repetitive, but they were fairly lucrative, especially in early game when trying to make some money. But in Bannerlord, the amount you can bet in a tournament is very limited, rendering them useless. Sure, you can also win some items, but these items, such as expensive horses, often can't be used in early game if your riding skill is too low, and none of the weapons and armors are super high-end or anything. Essentially, they managed to make tournaments even more boring and even less rewarding. And Bandit Lairs, my god, how lazy was this? It's basically exactly the same as Warband, except for prettier scenery, but the loot is also less rewarding, and this annoying part where you face the gang leader is meaningless. Whether you duel him or not doesn't make a difference at all, so this is another instance of something that ends up worse than it was in Warband. And this is a good time to talk about sieges again, because while they do flow better than in Warband, they still feel very repetitive. Regardless of the castle, it's always the same, 2 siege towers and a battering ram. You have the option in the world map to build trebuchets to bombard the walls. This will create breaches in the walls, typically making the assault much easier. But besides these 2 options, there are no means to get the castle to surrender. Even when they run out of food, instead the garrison will just slowly get wounded till you're out of patience and attack the weakened defenses. Seriously, Tailworlds? You collaborated with the Brittelwalda team to make Viking Conquest, and this is all you offer? What about the ability to, I don't know, build a siege camp, so that when enemy reinforcements arrive, we can fight defensively from an entrenched position, instead of just having a regular battle? What about ways to lower enemy morale, like poisoning their water supply, or sending in a group of men to do some sabotage? Hell, it would be fun to have some kind of stealth mechanic to sneak into enemy castles at night to open the gates. That would be so cool. There are so many ways in which sieges could be made more interesting, and the people at Tailworlds know that. I really wish there was more to the sieges. And surprisingly, the fighting mechanics aren't as good as in Warband. It's a cool thing about the games, that to attack and block from certain directions you have to make specific moves with the mouse. But in Bannerlord, the mouse movements have to be way more obvious for the game to pick up on them. So unless you're using a shield, fighting without one is really hard compared to Warband. I will also say, things like shooting arrows feel a bit slower in Bannerlord too. And couching with the lens, at least initially, is very unreliable. Look at this compared to this. I guess they were just going for realism with Bannerlord, but that's just a good example of how realism in video games can be worse instead of better. Quests in Bannerlord also largely missed the mark. Generally in Warband, quests had 2 purposes: make money and improve relations with the lords giving them. For me personally, I've always felt quests would lose their appeal the moment you have the means to go to war, as war is far more rewarding, but quests in Bannerlord are far more restricted and often far less rewarding. For starters, good luck getting quests from lords, because until you get enough renown, you won't have access to the Lord's Hall. And also, many quests are faction-based, meaning if you're an independent adventurer, you won't have access to these quests. This leaves quests from village and town leaders. These are merchants, landlords, and gang leaders that offer a lot of small paying jobs. While a lot of new quests have been added, most of the time I just feel they're not worth it. In Warband, if you help the village often enough, the relation will increase and they would start offering more, better recruits. In Bannerlord, however, recruits in towns and villages are offered by the different leaders, and it's by helping all of them individually that you get more troops from all of them. But because of that, it's just not worth it, because even without making an effort, settlements actually still offer a lot of troops. And also, there is a skill on the charms that randomly improve relations with the locals every time you enter a settlement, meaning you will passively unlock more recruits without having to do quests at all. So really, it's not that the quests are bad or boring, it's that they're not rewarding enough to do. This could easily be improved by Tale Worlds, just make the quest more rewarding. The companions are also something I'm not personally a fan of, with how they work in Bannerlord. In Warband, the companions are the same in every campaign. These characters have unique backstories, specialize in different areas, and have different personalities. I feel the companions in Warband is what really humanizes the game, as they offer several unique interactions that lords and other NPCs simply don't. Some of them will get into disputes, others will get along, and you could also send them off to spread your right to rule, and depending on their background, they will make certain promises. In Bannerlord though, companions are randomly generated in each campaign based on a handful of presets, and as companions, they don't offer any unique missions, and they don't really add anything to the game. They can be made governors or given command of their own warbands, but that's also true of family members, so it's not unique. I feel if Tale Worlds had taken the time to really flesh out the companions, even just a little, it would make all the difference in the world. But as it stands, the companions are, well, forgettable. And finally, persuasion is also something that I feel Bannerlord did a poor job with. Both in Warband and Bannerlord, the main purpose of persuasion is to convince lords to leave their current kingdoms and join yours. But so far, to my knowledge, I've never seen a single lord in Bannerlord even consider changing sides if they own lands, meaning in Bannerlord, the option to recruit lords is only available if they have no lands. And also, the dialogue options are virtually always the same, and the passing chance really feels more like a roll of dice than anything else. Compare that to Warband, if you convinced the lord to join your side, they and their lands would switch to your faction. There was also more emphasis on what the lord looks for in a king versus your own values as a king. In both games, I feel persuasion is a skill that is critical in the long run, but that has never been fleshed out, and somehow Bannerlord made it worse. So we've got both the ways in which Bannerlord improved upon Warband and the ways in which it didn't, but any good sequel can't just address elements from previous installments. They also have to come up with new stuff of their own, so let's address those in no particular order. I briefly mentioned the clan mechanics before, but it's worth repeating as Warband has nothing like that. In Warband, once you get to carry a banner and find a spouse to marry, that's about as far as it goes. But in Bannerlord, you get to create your own clan, which you rule over even if you're not the king of your faction. Clans are essentially your family and companions. Both can be used to govern settlements or to create warbands independent of your own, as well as caravans, or they can be in your party to be assigned different positions like surgeon or engineer. They can also be given divisions to come in battle, so it's all pretty cool. And speaking of family, this is another big addition. In Bannerlord, you can not only marry, but also have children, and if you enabled permanent death in the game options, you will get to play as either one of your siblings or one of your children after you die. As your children grow up, you will get to choose their skills, much like in character creation, which is both fun and surprisingly cute. One of the biggest features added to Bannerlord is smithing, which is the ability to craft your own weapons. The good side is, when you level up and unlock crafting parts, you can make some really badass looking weapons, and some of them you can also sell for a lot of money. Merchants in towns often have requests for weapons that match certain criteria, and this can be very lucrative. However, the skill is hidden behind essentially a lot of grind and a never-ending search for charcoal to forge and melt materials, as well as looking for materials required to make the weapons. Smithing is pretty cool generally, but you can easily play the game without ever trying it, and I just wish it was more accessible to begin with. And also, Tale Worlds needs to be made aware of this, but sometimes, if I make really large swords, the bottom tip is missing, and it really triggers me. Another seemingly big component of the game, I did say seemingly, is character traits. Each lord has a reputation which range from good to evil. As the player character, your reputation is also dictated by your actions. Do you let lords go, or do you take them prisoner? Do you raid villages? I feel this can be a very interesting feature for making allies and enemies, but as it stands, many have complained that character traits don't have a serious enough impact on the gameplay. For instance, being honorable or dishonorable does not change a lord's behavior. Honorable lords will still raid villages, and we have the option to execute lords after battle, but executing evil lords has seemingly the same impact as executing good ones. The main way I notice character traits having an impact is in dating. Like, you go on dates with lords and ladies, depending on their character traits, some answers will be preferable over others. But that's really just it. I hope they flesh it out more in the future. And that leaves us with story mode. I mean, it's not really a story mode, it's more like a unique mission that you can choose to start the campaign with or without. It's a very slight change from Sandbox, essentially. You'll have a main quest about finding the Dragon Banner, which you can use to make your own claim to the throne. And that's pretty much it. Given the nature of the Mount & Blade games, it was always about free exploration and doing whatever you want, so I'm not criticizing Bannerlord for not having a main story, but rather because they hinted at it, then barely did anything with it. A fleshed out story in Bannerlord could actually work really well, especially with equally fleshed out companions, but that's just a wish at this point. And there we have it. I think at the end of the day, Bannerlord is a decent sequel. In the most important areas, it improved a lot, but in other ways, I have my fair share of frustrations, especially considering the game has been out for 3 years and Warband has been out for 12. I can only hope those frustrations are addressed later on. When it comes to Bannerlord versus Warband, Bannerlord largely wins in a lot of areas. There is just one reason as to why I always end up going back to Warband more than Bannerlord, and it is the biggest reason of all, and you guessed it, it's the mods. I've waited a long time for Bannerlord mods to come even close to comparing with Warband mods, and nearly 3 years in, it's still far, far away. The reasons for that are obvious though. Bannerlord was in early access for the longest time, and this made it very difficult for mods to be created. But also the game is far bigger and has so much more potential that creating a total conversion for it is going to take a lot more time and resources. But in the meantime, anything other than native is better to play on Warband than on Bannerlord. Want to play a total conversion of Game of Thrones? I mean, sure, the mods for Bannerlord got the items right so far, and it's very promising, but Warband already has the entire Game of Thrones universe covered, in 2 different mods. The world is completed, as are the factions and the unique missions. Shikuho is a huge samurai mod coming to Bannerlord eventually, and it will be undoubtedly awesome. But if you want to experience feudal Japan right now, Gikukujo is a Warband mod for which new versions are still coming out, and it's fully playable. Lord of the Rings? Warhammer? Please. In conclusion, if you've never played either one of them, anything beyond native in the current times you'll have way more of a blast on Warband. I'm talking fantasy, gunpowder, new worlds and music and stories, it's got it all. That's not to say total conversion mods aren't coming to Bannerlord, they are. And when they do reach their full potential, Warband will be free, finally, to sit back among some of the greatest classics of all time. In my humble opinion. Anyway, that's about it for today. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far and are not subscribing, you'll be sending me mixed messages about a relationship. So please clear that up for me, hit that like button, smash that subscribe. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.